If you're going to review someone's book, you must obviously first pay them the courtesy of reading it, of actually buying it, or having it sent to you on approval. I actually bought it. We're talking, of course, about Tommy Robinson's and Peter Mcloughlin's Manifesto, which in actual fact is not a manifesto. It's analysis, a very deep analysis in actual fact, in many ways, of the manifesto of the so-called far right and far left, and the fact that the centrists have no ideology whatsoever. So is the book worth buying? Well, I can't tell you to buy it or not to buy it. I've read it. I found it very interesting, very thorough, but it falls down in many areas in actual fact. The first area in where it falls down very seriously, as far as I'm concerned, on historical fact alone, is the assertion that Adolf Hitler was a socialist because he was involved in socialist groups in Bavaria. Whilst the research is very thorough and detailed in just about every respect, in a couple of respects it falls down completely. And in this respect, it's just completely and utterly off course. It's wonky. And it's done to justify their narrative, their false narrative, in actual fact. So what am I talking about? So was Adolf Hitler a socialist? Well, in actual fact, no, he wasn't a socialist. He was sent by the Freikorps, Captain Ernst Röhm in particular, who he later executed, obviously, the Night of the Long Knives, to spy on all political factions operating in Bavaria. The socialists were amongst them. He was ordered to infiltrate them and to rise as far as he could in those organisations and relay that information back, obviously, to the Freikorps, who were concerned about yet more far-left attempts at revolution, like we saw with Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, the Soviet Socialist Republic of Bavaria. They wanted to prevent that. And so obviously Hitler was one of the ways in which they tried to prevent it by gathering information. But to argue that because Hitler was sent as a spy into socialist groups and also nationalist groups as well, I might add, obviously he infiltrated the German Workers' Party, which later became the NSDAP, the Nazi Party, as everyone commonly knows it. To argue that Hitler was only a hair's breadth away from Marxism is puerile. It really is, truly puerile. The fundamental differences between National Socialism and Marxism are actually quite obvious. I mean, I think I stated this in a previous video. Well, there is Operation Barbarossa, the objective of which was to wipe out Judeo-Bolshevism. It was Adolf Hitler who absolutely insisted on that operation, overruling the German General Staff. So, and then of course there's the Commissar Order, which I think I also made, this point I made in a previous video about Robinson's views on ethno-nationalism being socialist, which is not true at all in actual fact. So the purpose of the Commissar Order, again Hitler's work and the SS, and that purpose was to wipe out what they believed were the disease carriers of communism. Does this sound like a cabal of people who were only a hair's breadth away from Leninism, Trotskyism, Marxism, Bolshevism, communism, socialism, whatever faction you want to talk about in actual fact in the context of the left and the far left? And is there really a difference? Is there a centre left? Well, that's another issue that they go on to, and we'll cover that later. Fabianism. So Fabianism, quite frankly, isn't the centre-left at all. It masquerades as the moderate centre-left, but in actual fact, nearly all of these people were communist sympathisers at the outset. I'm talking about Tony Blair, that era, and the 200 Fabian MPs who sat in Parliament. And they cover this very extensively. Very good job in actual fact. But returning back to this wonky thinking of Adolf Hitler and National Socialismus, the simple truth is that Hitler was wholly committed to the eradication of both socialism and communism. There's very little difference between them in actual fact. Soviet Socialist Republics of the USSR, you know? Well, it's kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? Really, you would think. But I guess one of the real issues is that they take this point and they twist it and turn it to mean something that they want it to be, the false narrative. And I can tell you for a fact it's a false narrative, because I was heavily involved in the British National Party for nearly a decade. And so they claim that at times the British National Party openly identified as being National Socialist. This is complete and utter nonsense. It is contrived dishonesty, entirely typical of the centre-right in actual fact. At no time did the BNP ever openly identify as National Socialist. It only ever identified as being a nationalist political party. And in the context of actually being socialist, which is just absolute drivel, well, we were completely opposed to socialism. And the other rants they have, of course there are many rants, there are numerous rants, they're replete in actual fact. And so their rant about the British National Party is that, well, it was anti-Semitic, they were anti-Jewish. Well, I was at the British National Party's AGM in London in 1991, at which the BNP leader, John Tyndall, gave a speech, and about halfway through he got onto the issue of Jews living in the United Kingdom. The speech wasn't about Jews entirely, this was just a small part of it. And he said quite clearly, unequivocally, in actual fact, was the word he used, unequivocally, that Jews would be allowed to stay in the United Kingdom providing they swore an oath of allegiance to the British Crown and adhered to it. If they did, they would not be included even in the colour bar remigration policy, or repatriation as it was commonly known then. Repatriation, remigration, they're synonymous. It's one and the same thing, although the modern buzzword is remigration, because yet again nationalists put remigration on the map only for the centre-right imitators in their imitation game to swoop upon it and try and take it over and twist and turn it to their own ends. And their ends, basically, in the context of remigration, are not completely at odds with nationalism, but actually substantially different. And so this is the main battleground, I guess you could say, between nationalists and the centre-right, is this fundamental disagreement over what constitutes Britishness, and also the exact number of people who need to be remigrated from these islands to their lands of ancestral origin. And so obviously the centre-right will say, well, you know, like Lawrence Fox did in that utterly ludicrous debate with Steve Laws, the campaigner who put illegal migration in the English Channel on the map, only for Nigel Farage to imitate him in the imitation game, which is what the centre-right always do. So his argument was that if Britain becomes 95% African, and providing these Africans speak English, or pidgin English, or whatever other type of English they wish to speak, and they adopt some form of Britishness, then they are British. Well, that, of course, is absolute nonsense. And what I discovered as a result of that debate was that half of Reform UK supporters, ostensibly the centre-right, actually openly support Steve Laws. So, you know, there's great encouragement there for nationalists. Steve Laws is now in the Homeland Party, and they're obviously trying to get their act together, and they're succeeding in many ways. In actual fact, they're becoming very professional, although my main argument against them is this stunt they pulled at the general election, whereby Kenny Smith came out and said, oh, well, you know, if you think you've got no one to vote for and there's no hope, which in actual fact there is, vote for Reform UK. Well, why would you want to act as an enabling operation for Reform UK, for the centre-right, when the centre-right actually hate us? And this is what comes across very clearly in Manifesto. Whilst they concentrate far more on leftism, Let's use the umbrella term leftism to incorporate Leninism, Trotskyism, Marxism, communism, socialism, and of course, yes, the good old devil itself, Fabianism, which is what currently rules the United Kingdom, or what they call the oligarchy, the thing, the establishment. It's very thorough, in actual fact, the work that they've done, particularly Mcloughlin, because Mcloughlin is without question the leading author. Whilst it says it's co-authored, you can see that Mcloughlin has actually done most of the work. Robertson obviously understands the situation far better than what people understand, and this is why I make this point about them stating that the British National Party was socialist, and Adolf Hitler was a socialist just a hair's breadth away from Karl Marx, in actual fact, which is just absolute nonsense. I can't make the point often enough. When they were conducting their research, did they not think to actually research why Adolf Hitler was in these socialist groups? Well, if they had have done the job properly, a whole raft of search results would have come up showing that Hitler was sent into these far left groups, these leftist groups, like he was with the Nationalists, by the Freikorps on the orders of Captain Ernst Röhm. And that is beyond dispute, in actual fact. And whilst they do concentrate far more on leftism in the book, and obviously they expand on the Great Replacement, which is yet another nationalist concept, nothing to do with the centre-right, that they've also tried to hijack in their copycat manoeuvres, which is all part of the imitation game. So they've covered the replacement migration issue very thoroughly, in actual fact, and in it they've given credence to everything the British National Party said, but at the same time they're effectively screaming racist, you're racist, at the BNP, and nationalists, particularly ethno-nationalists, behaving just like the Fabians they rail against extensively in the book. And this is the hallmark of the centre-right, in actual fact, is whilst they purport to be almost nationalists, they're not at all, in actual fact. To be honest, there are times when the sliding Richter scale on the Overton rule, or ruler, the Overton ruler, leads them into the centre-left ground, where they compete for who is the most diverse faction of all. It's absolute nonsense. In fact, we saw with Liam Tufts on The Dozen, his YouTube podcast, an admission by Richard Crannan that Tommy Robinson's not even right-wing, let alone far-right. So what is he then? That would make him centre-left, surely? That's my opinion. At times he does, in actual fact, manifest as centre-left, although that doesn't come across at all in Manifesto. He manifests as something quite different, in actual fact. You would think, reading Manifesto, that you were actually dealing with someone who was a nationalist, not an ethno-nationalist, a nationalist. Tommy Robinson is nothing of the sort, in actual fact. My opinion is most of the time he's a centre-left patriot who hides behind the Union flag, quite frankly. And whilst he rails repeatedly against the British Union of Fascists and Oswald Mosley and his socialist beginnings and the socialist agenda to turn Britain into a totalitarian state, well, look, one has only to look at the marches organised by Tommy Robinson when he was in the EDL, and even now, the Unite the Kingdom march at the end of October. Is that not imitating the British Union of Fascists? Because, in my opinion, it certainly is. In fact, if you look at some of the forward echelon footage, which was taken on Victoria Street, where it meets Whitehall, you will actually look into the crowd. I did, in actual fact. I studied the footage. In fact, several of my friends actually went there. And my analysis of that is that too much different than the British National Party anti-IRA demonstration at the corner of Hyde Park and Edgware Road in April 1993. Although a damn sight more peaceful, obviously. But the striking similarities are there. And this is why I concentrate on these people so much, in actual fact, because they are wholly dedicated to the destruction of nationalism whilst aping everything nationalists have to say. They adopt our lexicon, they adopt our ideology, because they have no ideology whatsoever. The thing with the centre-right, i.e. populism, is essentially it's a fart in a wind machine. It's here today, gone tomorrow. It's vacuous, empty, almost nihilistic in actual fact. Because without the idea robbing train, the copycat system, they have absolutely nothing. They'd have to come up with an ideology of their own. And this is the whole point with the book Manifesto, is that whilst it uses that title, the book is not a manifesto. It's anything but a manifesto. It's a detailed critique of the manifesto of nationalism and also leftist groups, Fabianism in particular. That comes out very strongly towards the end of the book. And so, going back to the, I guess you could say, the central issue, the opening thread of this video, is the book worth buying? Well, frankly, I found it thoroughly interesting, in actual fact. I think it is worth buying. I don't think it's worth £24.99, however. I think it's overpriced by at least £10. But that's entirely up to the authors, isn't it? Only they know the reason why it actually costs that much. It's definitely not worth £24.99. But obviously, Robinson's avid groupies will pay that. I'm not one of his groupies, never have been, never will be. And I won't just sit here and trash the book completely, because that's not my style. We see people in the mainstream media who've tried to trash the book and they've not even read it. And when they're challenged about it, and Tommy was absolutely spot on about this in actual fact, he said, well, they've not even read my book. And they defend that by saying, well, we're not giving him £24.99, well, how else are you to read the book if it's not being sent out on approval? So I at least gave Robinson and Mcloughlin the courtesy of buying the book from Urban Scoop and then giving my detailed analysis of it, which is what I would expect people to do with my books. I have all manner of shit posting reviews on my books from people who've never read them. And this is the point that I'm making. Buy a book and then review it if that's what you want to do. My opinion is it's definitely worth reading, but it's not worth £24.99. I guess there's a real revelation on page 290 in actual fact, where Robertson and Mcloughlin actually admit that the BNP's policy on replacement migration was absolutely correct from the outset. They actually argue in favour of it. They say there is no need for any immigration into this country. And they point out this large disparity between the wealth immigrants actually generate in the country and what it actually costs us. So it's a 14% deficit. They actually cost the economy 14% more than what they actually generate sum total. But it's not just an economic issue, is it? Let's not get all Tory on it. And that's another point that comes out in the book, I think very clearly, is the strange fascination with Margaret Thatcher and how she led a revolution against leftism. And bear in mind, of course, that all far-right groups, apparently nationalists, are part of the left, really, because they're indistinguishable, which is absolute dribble. Margaret Thatcher led a revolution against all of them. She didn't create this parasite's paradise, which we all know about in actual fact. And Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, they just want to ape her, and try and recreate Thatcherism. Well, I don't want Thatcherism back in any way, shape or form, quite frankly. I think it was an absolutely disastrous period which divided this nation very deeply, particularly between North and South, and those divisions are still very active to this day. Who wants that back? Well, in actual fact, Nigel Farage wants it back. Richard Tice does, and it would seem seemingly, that Robinson and Mcloughlin are also in love with the idea of having Thatcherism back. My goodness. Well, we must do something to ensure that doesn't happen, quite frankly. I take the point that, Thatcher rebelled against the Fabian oligarchy. Of that there is absolutely no doubt. But to actually say that nationalist groups like the National Front and the BNP were part of that Fabian oligarchy, in essence, by transference and extension, it's infantile. It's absolute drivel. Truly, it is. It's like listening to Hope Not Hate or Hate No Hope, Nick Lowell's, and before that, Jerry Fables and Searchlight Magazine. It comes across as exactly the same type of infantile drivel, really. But, I think there is so much more about the book that is thoroughly positive than negative, not just in my perspective, but full stop, quite frankly. I think a great many of Robinson's supporters will learn a great deal, much more than they already know, from reading this book. And in that sense, I think it does a great deal of good, And like I said, apart from the price tag, yeah, buy it. But I can't tell you to buy it or not to buy it. That's a choice you have to make for yourself. I'm not here to tell you how to live, how to think, what to do, etc. I'm giving you my opinion. And I've given my opinion quite extensively on the British National Party as it relates vis-a-vis to these rather ridiculous allegations in Manifesto, and they can't be left unchallenged. They have to be put on the spot and given the thorough examination that I've put them to, in actual fact. And chapter 5, about replacement migration, which most definitely is not a conspiracy theory. It is an established fact, openly admitted, although whenever you pull the Fabians up on it, the oligarchy, as they put it in the book, they deny it and say it's just a far-right conspiracy theory. Well, Tommy Robinson definitely is not far-right. I can tell you that for a fact. I mean, I've been called far-right for over many years, repeatedly. I don't care. I'm not really interested at all, in actual fact. They can call me whatever sordid little names they want. It's only name-calling at the end of the day, isn't it? Gaslighting. But then, Tommy and his fanboys also do gaslighting. The centre-right are absolutely notorious for gaslighting people. They are, in actual fact, dedicated to gaslighting nationalists. They do it almost with an obsessive fascination. It's like they're fixated about nationalists because they realise that we have all the best ideas, quite frankly, and they have no ideas, and therefore they have to use the imitation game because in the absence of any ideology, they have to rob it. And you see that very clearly in Manifesto. My real disappointment with the book was the fact that they tell you everything what is wrong. And it's very thorough and detailed in actual fact, but they have no solutions on how to fix it. And this has always been my point. I had this discussion with a close friend of mine recently, and I said to him, one of my biggest issues with Robinson and his crowd is that they like to tell you what's wrong, but they have no real solutions of how to put things right. And so that is a really big letdown. And whilst people would look at the title and think, oh, manifesto, maybe this is a manifesto, maybe this is, an encyclopedia of Tommy's ideas on how to rebuild the country, resurrect Britain. It really isn't at all, in actual fact. It's a demolition job on everyone they're opposed to, quite frankly. It's quite a bad demolition job as well, on nationalists, in actual fact, because what I've done here is demolish their argument completely. It's actually quite easy, And Robinson, you must remember, was a member of the British National Party for a year. He claims, I didn't know what they really were. Well, what they really were. That's a very interesting point. So, Robinson, where did he get all of his knowledge from about the Islamist grooming gangs? Well, that all came from the British National Party. It just didn't come out of thin air. It was the British National Party, Nick Griffin, BNP TV, and the former the Labour MP Sarah Champion, who led the campaign to expose the grooming gangs. Robinson did nothing innovative or original in that context. He simply jumped on the bandwagon that we'd built, you know, which is what the centre-right always do. They wait for a bandwagon to be built, and then their puppet masters tell them to go and jump on it to take it over, to ensure that that real, sincere issue can never get anywhere. That is the whole purpose of a safety valve operation, and that's what the centre-right really is. It's a safety valve operation. So, you know, Robinson, he learned all of these good things from the British National Party, but spends all of his time, you know, well, not all of his time, a lot of his time in actual fact, distancing himself from it. It's fair enough, he can distance himself from it. That's his choice, his predilection. But, you know, where he goes wrong in actual fact, in my opinion, is to come up with these stupid fairy tales about, oh, well, you know, they were socialists. When in actual fact, they weren't socialists. And I've never been a socialist. You know, whilst the BNP leader, John Tyndall, said quite openly that the BNP should back the poll tax rebellion, which we did. I got a 3-month suspended sentence for non-payment of the poll tax. That doesn't mean that we're socialists or in league with socialists. It's simply that we agreed that the poll tax was a deeply unjust socio-economic rip-off designed to further enrich the rich, the oligarchy that Tommy Robinson is ranting about so much in Manifesto. I'll tell you what I'd like to see from Robinson primarily, and Mcloughlin if he wants to jump on the bandwagon as well, is I'd like to see them produce a manifesto of detailed, tenable, credible ideas that the vast majority of people can actually relate to and support. The fact that they won't produce it and have never produced it tells you that they have no solutions to offer, and that anyone who comes up with a solution gets gaslighted, shouted down, threatened, abused. They're notorious for threats and abuse. I've exposed this in several videos on my YouTube channel. You know, it's facts-based evidence, it's incontrovertible. They can deny it all they want. That's great. Yeah, that's exactly what I want them to do. You know, that's what I'm here to do, is to demolish them. You know, I'm not here to play nicely and make friends with the centre-right. I'm here to demolish them, to bring them down to size, bring them down a peg or two, show them up for what they really are, and take away most of their supporters. That is what nationalists should be doing, is that we have to recapture that ground that has been taken from us with the very unfortunate collapse of the British National Party, and I explained the real reasons for that in a video a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely nothing to do with Nigel Farage and his grotesque deluded ego. And that's another issue, you know, is that Tommy, before he went to prison again, was very upset because Nigel Farage had refused to worship at the altar of Tommy Robinson. And because their egos are so huge, Tommy also, Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, Tommy refuses to worship at the altar of fake Farage. So, of course, there's going to be a clash, isn't there? And when Richard Tice, that upper middle class snob, comes onto the scene and says, oh, we have nothing to do with that lot whatsoever, those working class trash, in essence, which is what they really think of us, these Thatcherite Tories, which begs the question why Robinson and Mcloughlin are so fond of Thatcherism. Bizarre, that one. Yeah, of course, then everybody's nose is out of joint, and then you can see UKIP, obviously, which is trying to move away from the centre-right, reaping the rewards, bringing in more members, and ultimately trying to mimic the British National Party almost entirely on mass remigration, stating over 5 million people need to be remigrated. You know, when the British National Party said less than that, i.e. 3.5 million people, which is what needed to be done at one time, needed to be repatriated, remigrated, the media went absolutely hysterical with hate, with gaslighting, the tame mainstream media or lamestream media or mainstream media, in actual fact, whichever way you want to put it. That's fine by me. They went absolutely ballistic. But obviously, when UKIP ape the ideology of the British National Party, there's no immense media outrage, and we have to ask ourselves, why is that? I mean, it was the media, after all, that told UKIP after the EU ref to go away and dismantled. And little Nigel did his first runaway game, didn't he? Or was it his first runaway game? I think he ran away before that. And then he ran away, in the early hours of the morning, on the 24th of June, 2016. And then he ran away again and flat-packed the Brexit Party and handed everything over to the Con-Socialist Party, as Robinson and Mcloughlin put it. Quite rightly, in actual fact, it most definitely is a Con-Socialist Party. It started with David Cameron coming to power, the heir to Blair, and Theresa May was absolutely, no doubt about it, a cultural Marxist. She subscribed, obviously, to free market capitalism at the same time as these so-called Tories do, but their social policies were a continuation of what Tony Blair did with the Fabian Project, and they not so much changed the Overton window, but expanded the Fabian window, the Fabian control over society. They expanded and promoted its agenda. Sunak, well, ridiculous really. Could anybody really tell the difference between Sunak and a socialist? So these are very credible points that they make in the book. They're very well worth making. Yes, to call them the modern Conservative Party Con-Socialist, absolutely spot on. The evidence proves that conclusively. But to say that the British National Party was effectively socialist, really left-wing, and it was Nigel Farage who did this in actual fact many years ago, I think around about 2010, 2011, when he first hooked up with Hope Not Hate and handed over the UKIP membership list to them to be vetted, so that the far left could determine who could and could not be a member of UKIP. That is, not Nigel, Nick Lowles and his gang. They decided who could join UKIP and who could stand as a candidate for them. So we handed over operational control of UKIP and started saying, well, the BNP is a left-wing organisation. And he used exactly the same deluded rant that comes out in Manifesto from Robinson and Mcloughlin. But ultimately, I would say this, by all means, buy the book or don't buy the book. It's your choice. But if you buy the book, approach it with an open mind. If you're one of Robinson's groupies, then obviously, having an open mind is going to be a very difficult issue. But, it's going to be quite a struggle, isn't it, when you adore someone in the way that some of these people do, and just want to sing, oh, Tommy, Robinson doesn't have a manifesto. And the book isn't a manifesto. We are still waiting to see any form of credible solutions from Tommy and his crowd. They like rallies, aping the BUF style, of course. But what I want to see from them, is a detailed manifesto for widespread, sweeping reform. I want to see the creation of an ideology that can endure across the ages in the same way that nationalism has, or National Socialism, communism, Fabianism, leftism. I don't want to see any more fart in a wind machine antics. That's the problem with the centre right. It's just the imitation game in which they pretend to be almost nationalist to siphon up that public support and channel it into a blind alley, a safety valve operation. That is my main beef with the centre-right, is they're not genuine. They're a bunch of con artists, quite frankly, grifters, gaslighters. But in truth, the book, it's very thorough in many ways, but there are also some very big holes in it as well, which I think I've covered in quite some detail. Was I impressed? I always knew Tommy to be more intelligent than what people suspected. As I said, Mcloughlin, I think, has done 60% of the work on the book, quite frankly, although you can see Tommy's input at times. And, is it worth buying? Yeah, it's definitely worth buying, but not for £24.99. If a friend has it, ask a friend to loan it to you, you know, and read it with an open mind. That's the most important thing. Don't approach it with prejudices of any description. I mean, obviously, that's going to be almost impossible for the left, you know. Because all they want to do is rant and spout abuse, which in actual fact is what most centre-right people do as well. And until they get out of this abuse factory, this troll factory that they've built up around themselves, and then whinging like narcissists basically about, oh, I'm a victim, oh no, oh, I didn't mean to threaten this person, I didn't threaten this person. No, it's absolute drivel, all of it. I'm sick and tired of dealing with these people. Truly I am. That's why I want to see a new, truly revolutionary movement in this country to sweep away the rotten old order and throw the centre-right into the dustbin of history where they belong. It's completely rotten, this nihilistic vacuum that's been created, and it needs to be gone. And one of the reasons why I read this book, why I paid the £24.99, was to be able to give people a detailed analysis of what the book is about, and that's what I've done, and I've done it to the best of my abilities. And obviously, I have 34 years of experience in politics and journalism. And I think the final point I'll make before we close is Robinson and Mcloughlin, not at great length, but they go on about it repeatedly, about Ukraine and neo-Nazism. And, look, I exposed all of this in 2014. It's nothing new, quite frankly. Yet again, it's imitation game. It's regurgitation, copycat. But, they make some very interesting points, and it's useful to see it in print again, basically, and going out to a wider audience. But truthfully, no, it's all been done before. And in terms of these neo-Nazi groups, perhaps Tommy, who is so faithfully dedicated to Zionism and Israel, should ask himself why Igor Kolomoisky, a Zionist Jew, was actually funding the Azov Battalion, which then became the Azov Regiment, and then the Azov Brigade, and the Misanthropic Division International. All these neo-Nazi groups across the world with deep connections with British neo-Nazis. So, does Tommy not have a problem with that? No, that's another issue he airbrushes as well. He tells you that Ukraine is full of neo-Nazis, and it's a terrible, wicked thing that the West has done provoking this war with Russia. Most definitely. I agree. I exposed this in 2014, 2015, and that much is covered extensively in the documentary Hunted. But, what Tommy draws short on is who's funded these people. Well, one has only to look at Victoria Nuland, another Zionist Jewess, who notoriously said in April, 2022, when asked by a journalist about starvation in Europe caused by this war, she said, well, I failed to see a downside, is less Europeans is what we want. And in actual fact, the correct grammar is fewer Europeans, but, just being pedantic, of course, which I enjoy being. I like being pedantic when dealing with people like Victoria Nuland, hideous specimen in actual fact. I think it's about time we heard from Tommy Robinson and what he thinks about these Zionists. Are there good Zionists or bad Zionists? Are all Zionists good or all Zionists bad? Perhaps we should ask his paymaster, Ezra Levant. Did Ezra Levant finance a manifesto? That's a question, really, that a lot of people should focus on. Who financed, manifesto? And more importantly, why is there no manifesto for change in the book?